the second half of the afternoon underway here with Critical Industry Support panel. Steve Peterson will be our moderator today. Steve is the past director of sourcing sustainability for General Mills. Steve also owns and manages Peterson Farms, a grain and livestock operation, and has years of experience and responsibility with supply chain operations and sourcing, along with collaborative manufacturing. Steve serves on several nonprofit boards and is a past president of the Minnesota Agri-Growth Council. Steve, thanks for your time today, and I'll let you introduce your panel.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. So thanks for having me, and I just want to do a confession at the outset that I'm really a neophyte when it comes to this topic. And so I'm in the uber learning mode myself here. So, it strikes me, just to sort of tee this up, that, I first put my producer hat on. Been a tough time for production agriculture in the state of Minnesota. So that's the first element that we have. Difficult to make money. You read about that in the newspaper almost every day. When Mother Nature hasn't cooperated much this year. Beyond that, I'm concerned myself with my own farm that as a producer, it's the changes in agriculture, to go big or go home, and the capital required, and just the control I have over the value of what I create is minimized in a commodity situation. So there's a great desire for more value-added agriculture in this state. So that's created, I kind of feel, a mini gold rush here around this topic of industrial hemp in the state. And Mark and I talked briefly before this that, really the industry is way ahead of the regulations. And I'm a bit of a downhill skier. We're kind of over the top of our skis here. And I have great respect for the entrepreneurs in the room that are taking some of that risk out ahead of it. I hope that in at least some clarity can be brought in our discussion today around that too. And we had a pre-call. I got a little bit. We'll see what happens here. And so we're going to get going. I'm going to introduce our three panelists, wonderful people. Thank you all for doing this. And I'll ask a few questions, but I really would really hope that most of the questions are going to come from you. So our panelists tonight or today are Whitney. Let me get to the quick deal here. Whitney Place comes from an agricultural background. Her family in southwestern Minnesota. She's the assistant commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And really under her purview, she is responsible, her staff, for the whole industrial hemp program and the pilot program at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Thank you, Whitney. Next is Cody Weiberg, and he is executive director of the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy. And as I understand, that's really the group that it gets to sort of the drugs and the food additives and all. They kind of set the regs in terms of what CBD and its derivatives how they can be used. Is that correct? And I'll let you go further with that for drugs. Yep. And last but not least is Mark Castor, attorney with Dorsey and Whitney. He's been there longer than I was at General Mills. A lot of experience. He's done business law for over 30 years. But his sweet spot really within business law is around how to deal with regulations. And so thank you, Mark. Thank you all three for joining us. I'll turn it over to Whitney first to give more introduction and maybe tee up what she is doing in this space. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Like you said, I serve as assistant commissioner, and so I oversee the staff that work on the industrial hemp program, but I don't really do any of the work. Our staff, Margaret and Katie, are here, and Tony, and they, between them, the three of them, they've probably been on every hemp field or greenhouse or, location that it's growing in this state in the last month. And so, it's a big endeavor. It's a new endeavor that we're entering into here. And this panel is called the Critical Industry Supports Panel. And I know and I hear from all of you that one critical industry support would be regulatory clarity. And we're trying, we're working on it. With the USDA rule coming out last Thursday, we at the department have been going through the rule. There are some concerns that we see with it, and we're hearing concerns from all of you. We hope to communicate those to the federal government and to see, if we can make any changes to make the program as workable as we can, and to make it, so the industry can be a success. But at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, we did pass our industrial hemp law need my cheat notes here, in 2015, thanks to the Minnesota legislature. And so we've been operating under a pilot program, which was granted in the 2014 Farm Bill. And as far as regulations go, we really have been in a pilot program. And I think that's another area in which the industry is just way ahead of federal and state regulations, because this was always meant to be a pilot. Not until this year has it been a full-fledged crop in this country. And so we've been, I think, running a pretty successful program. We've really, really dramatically increased in the number of licenses for growers and processors in the state. We had over 700 this year, growing over 8,000 acres of hemp in Minnesota. And we look forward to that continuing and to continue to grow. Industrial hemp kind of touches all parts of our agency, and so we have an industrial hemp team at the department. We have a couple marketing staff back there, so they're looking at, how can we improve processing capacity in the state. In our pesticide and fertilizer management division, we're looking at, what kinds of pesticides and fertilizer approaches to industrial hemp could we develop. Currently, there are no pesticides registered for use on industrial hemp. And so we're taking a look at that and working with EPA. And then we also have our food safety division, which we do regulate ingredients of food, of which CBD is not considered an ingredient by the FDA. And so that has been a challenge and is another gray area that we know you're all working through. So that's kind of what the MDA does with industrial hemp, and happy to answer any questions and have further conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Whitney. Go ahead, Cody.
Again, I'm Cody Weiberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy, a licensed pharmacist by training. Even though we're called the Board of Pharmacy, we don't just regulate the practice of pharmacy. We actually have authority beyond that. We are the agency in the state, as small as we are, that regulates the manufacture, distribution, and dispensing of drugs, any sort of a drug potentially. And we're not a law enforcement agency, but we also have the same authority at the state level that the DEA has at the federal level, which is through rulemaking, we can, with some limitations, we can add things to the controlled substance schedules and take them out and switch them around. So that's kind of why we're involved. It's not because we regulate pharmacies, it's because we regulate drugs. So I really, maybe in the back of my mind, was kind of aware that CBD products were maybe starting to show up, but it really hadn't hit my radar screen. But Department of Public Safety and Department of Agriculture, some of the staff were having conversations about issues, and I think Department of Public Safety was reaching out to agriculture about what's legal, what's not, that sort of thing. At one point in time, about 14, 15 months ago, someone in that email chain said, has anyone talked to Cody Weiberg at the Board of Pharmacy yet? And so that's kind of when I got brought into it. And then I started doing research. I looked at the 2014 federal law, I looked at the 2015 state law, and I realized that there were a lot of products, not just a few products, even back then, a whole lot of products that were being sold where CBD in particular had been extracted from hemp and put into what fit the federal and state legal definitions of the word drug. And so, I had to basically, when I got into this discussion, say, well, wait a minute, there's really nothing in the 2014 federal bill or the 2015 bill that actually allows anything to be extracted from hemp and to put in a drug-like product to be sold for human consumption. And I'm not going to go into the details of the legal analysis, but it was pretty clear to me that that was the case. The 2018 federal bill, I was waiting for that because there was some thought that maybe Congress would actually clear everything up for around the country as to what products could be derived from hemp and legally sold. And in our case, we're worried about what's sold for human consumption as a drug. But in reality, what the 2018 law did in terms of my area is actually to make it very clear that no provisions in that 2018 bill in the hemp area superseded any of the statutes and rules regulated by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Administration. So none of the provisions, or the Food and Drug Administration, so none of the provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act relating to drugs and dietary supplements was going to be superseded by that bill. So that actually, from our perspective, didn't clear anything up. And so I'm going to kind of just tell you a little bit more and maybe finish up and make sure there's plenty of time for questioning. But under both federal and state law, and there's some slight differences, but a drug is anything other than food. So no, we do not regulate food, but it's anything other than food for which the intended use, not the labeled use necessarily, but the intended use is either the prevention, treatment, or cure of a disease, or the alteration of the structure and function of human or animal bodies. So that is the definition of a drug. And under Minnesota law, it's only legal to sell a drug if it's approved for use by the Food and Drug Administration, its labeling is approved by the Food and Drug Administration, its manufacturer is registered by the FDA and licensed by our board, and the manufacturer uses what are called current good manufacturing procedures. I'm not aware of any product except for one approved by the FDA called Epidiolex for pediatric seizures that meets all those conditions. So all of these products under state and federal law are considered to be what's called misbranded and adulterated. Under Minnesota law, we're not, again, a law enforcement agency, but it's actually a crime to sell misbranded and adulterated drugs. It's a misdemeanor. The board itself has the authority to issue what are called embargoes to prevent the sale of products and also to issue cease and desist orders. We've not done any of that yet for 3 reasons, and I think that's where I'll finish up. One is what I mentioned before. We were hoping that Congress and I guess I have a little bit more to talk about after this, that the Congress and the legislature might take some action. 2, we simply don't have the resources. One of the things I've kind of jokingly said is an agency that has 23 people probably can't issue a cease and desist order to Jeff Bezos at Amazon.com because last time I checked they had 7 pages of products there. Actually, those are the primary 2 reasons. The last thing I need to say is our legislature did pass legislation in 2019 that I drafted at the request of Senator Carla Bigham. Didn't think it would get passed, but she got it passed. And as long as certain conditions are met under state law, but still not federal law, effective January 1st, 2020, there will be some products that can be sold as drugs, but certain testing and labeling requirements will have to be met. And there's information on our website. We have an FAQ document on our website about that, and we will be issuing more FAQs within the next week.
Thank you, Cody. Mark brings both a legal perspective from a business perspective, but also some financial sort of maybe clarity is not the right word, but you're going to talk about that as well.
So yes, thanks, Steve. I'm Mark Castor. I'm a partner at Dorsey & Whitney, and I field questions routinely now on hemp, on cannabis, on CBD, and the legal requirements, the legal consequences. As you heard from Cody, he's a good advertisement for me because many of the same issues that he's raised, I get asked all the time, and the questions are, what are the legal answers? What should I do? How should I do it? How do I mitigate risk? And the truth of the matter is, as Steve said at the start of the program this afternoon, is that your industry has outpaced the law. Where we had a federal system, a Controlled Substances Act, we're now moving into a new regime. I don't know what that's going to look like. That's going to play forward, but it's going to take some time. And there is going to be a tremendous amount of legal uncertainty while we're in this time period where the agencies and society as a whole are really going to struggle with how and what should we do to address the prominence of CBD and other, cannabis oil and other types of hemp-related products in the marketplace. So from a legal perspective, I get asked really two main questions. What is the regulatory regime, and why is there this patchwork of laws and regulations? And how can we get some kind of harmony? How can we get some kind of certainty in our lives so that we can undertake and move forward with our business? That's number one. And number two, I get a lot of questions regarding, how do I transact business? How do I deal with my bank? How do I deal with the transfer of money and funds? There's some good news on that front, the second front, and that is just yesterday afternoon, the FDIC indicated that it was going to be coming out with guidance within the next week, which will be the FDIC, the Comptroller of the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and I think it's the National Enforcement Bureau, which requires banks and lending institutions to report on suspicious quote-unquote activities. There's going to be guidance now on how they should interact with companies that are in the hemp and cannabis business. So I think, look for some more clarity or guidance anyways to these lending institutions and banks in the next week. But the truth of the matter is this is going to roll forward, and we're going to see changes on almost a daily basis. I subscribe to a number of news services, and there isn't a day that goes by that there isn't 8, 9, 10 different items regarding this industry. And so I think, you're looking for certainty, but you're in an industry that doesn't have that certainty right now that you have to deal with. And there are ways that we can, and we'll talk a little further about how you might manage and mitigate some of the legal risk. Whether it's how you, structure your company, where to structure your company, is Delaware where you should, form your NewCo, or maybe it's better to do it in Nevada. A lot of my clients are moving and structuring in Nevada as opposed to Delaware. How are you going to register names? Can you get trademarks and patents and, copyrights on registrations that are directly related to the hemp or the cannabis industry? There's a lot of uncertainty, as the other panelists will tell you, as we move forward. And, there's just an element of risk that folks are going to have to accept. And you're not going to go to a lawyer or even to the regulators and say, give me the answer, because we don't have them yet. And so as we move this forward, I think it's incumbent upon all of you to participate in that process, make comments to the rules that came out, let the industry have a voice here in terms of structuring how this regulatory environment is going to move forward, because we're at the precipice of it, and you have an ability to really make a difference there. And just one hats off to AURI. I mean, this book here on building an industry, I hope you're supporting this organization, because this is the kind of thing that we really need to have in terms of pushing forward a program that allows this industry to grow, and it's going to grow, and it's exciting to be a part of it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mark, let's just go with what you just teed up. We have a lot of investment already. 700 producers, 8,000 acres, 400,000 square feet under roof. You said there are some things that people can do in the early phase of investment to mitigate some of the risk. But expound on that a little bit more, if you would.
Well, I think you talk about your corporate structure. How are you going to structure your business, right? It's going to be an LLC. Let's not commingle your assets, other sort of non-hemp, non-cannabis assets with the cannabis business. Let's keep those separate. Let's follow corporate formalities. Let's make sure that we're undertaking business in a way that, segregates but allows you to move forward. A lot of companies are having difficulty on the financing side, so they're looking for partners. So thinking about how you construct a joint venture agreement. What would that look like? How are you going to address the responsibilities of the various parties? What can you do in your contractual documents to assist in mitigating risk? Things like waivers of liability, assumptions of risk, limits on or caps on the amount of liability that you might take. These are all things that can be incorporated into your business agreements that can help mitigate risk. Can I say, is it going to eliminate risk? No. Are they, foolproof? Absolutely not. But we're in a business environment right now where you're doing what you can to manage risk, and these are the sorts of things that you can start to do, or perhaps you've already done them, and you can go down the whole list of things. Look, there's nothing really unique about your business. You're going to have the same legal issues as any other business, whether it's employment or whether it's licensing, whether it's addressing, your supply chain and your distribution agreements, your transportation agreements. You're going to have the same kinds of contractual or other commitments. The question is, because you're in this industry that's teetering on, or not teetering is not the right word, on the edge of regulation versus the new requirements that are coming out. That uncertainty requires you to be nimble enough to put programs forward in your contractual and business dealings in ways that'll help you manage the risk going forward. And I think that's what we try to do when we're talking with our clients. How can we help you manage that risk? Understanding that that risk is there, what can we do to kind of take some of the steam off the plate? And each business, each enterprise, each operation is a little bit different, but we work hard to try to address the specific needs of the clients. You mentioned earlier, and I'll just, one war story here, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Steve. I had a client out in Colorado, and Whitney was mentioning pesticides, and the state actually undertook testing of some of the products that were being sold by my client, and it turned out that they had high levels, allegedly by the state, of pesticide, right? So the state said you can't sell them. And we said, well, we don't really understand the test. We don't use any pesticides in our fields, et cetera, right? We want to go and test. Well, it was at a point in time where I couldn't take a sample of that product and send it. There was no testing lab other than the state lab in Colorado. I couldn't send that product to another state with a testing lab without violating federal law, right? And so all of a sudden I've got this evidence that the state's produced saying you've got a product that contains pesticide and we want to stop selling it and recall it, right? And I can't challenge it because I can't get another lab to test for me because I can't send it to another state. And so these are unique challenges that companies and clients might have, but it's indicative of sort of the problems that you have in this startup arena, and one that, as a lawyer, we try to figure out ways to manage it. We actually did find a way to manage that one, but that's just one example of things that might occur.
Thank you. Whitney, you at the department, you seem to have a kind of a dual role of being the front line of sort of regulating this, but also trying to help producers navigate their way through this whole process. Can you talk about that dance a little bit, and maybe talk about how you can help as much as how you can regulate?
Sure. Well, I will say I'm not the one who's doing most of the dancing. That is our staff, who is really fielding all of the questions, which are always very good questions. It's just a matter of whether or not we have an answer for all of you. But I think in terms of the regulatory side of things, we have concerns with some of the things that are coming from the federal government, just in terms of like implementing a regulatory program and the tasks that we have to do as the regulators. I know that the industry has concerns, but all of that is something that we want to make sure works for and with the industry, so that we can do some of the other things, including, promoting, processing capacity and, helping growers find the right genetics and all of that. And so it is, we're kind of playing in both areas there, but I think it's something that we can do. It's just we are going to need time probably to get all of this set up in a way that works for everybody.
Yeah, let's talk about time. We talked about this on our phone conversation. Clarity and risk for business people, it's difficult. So what kind of, and I know you don't know this for sure because and for maybe two parts question, how much of what you do at the state level is dependent upon federal law? And secondly, what kind of time frame are we thinking about here? And I'll open up that to all three of you. So, Cody, you want to take it first? Or whoever, go ahead.
FDA. Okay. Well, most of what we do is dependent on the federal law, and the rule that came out last week, I think, is a lot more prescriptive than a lot of us thought it was going to be, and so that has us relying even more heavily on the federal law. So, we'll work through that, but I think there are some decision points that we'll be making as a state, and so we hope to hear from all of you as we're writing our plan. We hope that you do make comments to the USDA if you have issues, and, we'll be able to see those. And then, come to our listening sessions or come set up a meeting with us. We want to hear from you. So those decision points that we do have to make as a state, we can make sure that your input is involved in them.
So what I would say is that the Board of Pharmacy is also to an extent dependent on federal law. So in our powers and duties section, it says that we do that regulation I talked about before of drug products in accordance with the federal act, which means the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And just as a matter of law, in areas where Congress has authority to regulate, federal law is supreme and can trump state law. So, to an extent, we obviously have to look at what federal law is. However, we're dealing with cannabis sativa, where 36, 37, 38 states, whatever, have decided to sort of ignore federal law, including Minnesota, to establish medical marijuana or medical cannabis programs, all of which are in violation of federal law. This is, when Senator Bigham came to me, I went ahead and helped her draft this legislation. It did get passed. It will go into effect. And under state law, the sale of drug-like products that contain CBD will be legal as long as the requirements are met in as little as 2 months, or less than 2 months now. It's still going to be a violation of federal law, though, and the board is really has been taking the position of we have to tell people what we truly believe the federal and state law says. We can't just tell people what they might want to hear, but agencies have a certain amount of enforcement discretion that they can do, and we don't like to use that enforcement discretion lightly. But one of the reasons that you use enforcement discretion, I've already mentioned, when you simply do not have the resources to handle the issue. And so our board is really going to respond to complaints. We haven't had complaints yet, but if we do get complaints about products that are potentially harming people or making really egregious claims or something like that, we will investigate the complaint and take appropriate action. In the meantime, what I think in terms of timing issues is I don't think really any of this is going to be fully solved until Congress acts to decide once and for all how the cannabis sativa plant in all of its forms and varieties is going to be handled in this country. Is it going to be legal or not? What forms are going to be legal? Can things like CBD be extracted and sold as drugs? Can they be sold as dietary supplements? Which, by the way, I forgot to mention this. The FDA has made it very explicit that they can't also be sold as dietary supplements. So timing, I think we could be in for a number of years of dealing with uncertainty until Congress acts and creates uniform national standards.
I don't disagree with either of those comments, but I think this is a freight train that's already left the station, and it's going to continue to chug along. And it's one thing for regulators to say we're going to regulate and we're going to pass laws, whether Congress does or not. The train's out of the station, and I just don't. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to roll this back. And so, from a legal perspective, the interface here is not the intrastate issues, because you're going to have states that are going to regulate inside of their states. It's going to be what happens when you want to cross those state boundaries and where there is federal oversight or federal jurisdiction. And so we've already seen many cases in the banking arena, in the federal courts. We've seen issues in regards to trucking companies that cross state lines. That's where you're going to see this continued tension. I agree with the comment about discretion. There's a lot of enforcement discretion all over the place, right? But you don't want to be the business owner that's facing down, some criminal complaint, wondering whether you had intention, under the criminal laws to violate, federal law or even state law. And so you're looking for certainty, more that you can limit it to, intrastate issues, the less risk. If you were going to put this on a risk profile, you'd want to be looking at things that reduce your risk, and the intrastate issues are, obviously less risky in a state like Minnesota or Colorado or Nevada or Oregon or Washington, right, than it is when you're crossing state lines or even international borders. So, I agree it's going to take some time, but I don't think that's going to slow this industry down. And so, there's going to be players and folks that want to take or are willing to take more risk. There's going to be big companies that don't want to risk reputation or product liability claims that are going to wait. But, first to market often is the winner. And so you've got an economic incentive to keep pushing, and you've got the legal reality. And so somebody willing to take more risk, a small player, is probably going to be, continuing to push the envelope, where the big companies maybe will sit back a little bit and wait. But it's the big companies that are going to push Congress. They're going to push, the legislative fix. And as small entities and small enterprises, you want to have a say in that. And so I absolutely support Whitney's comment about get comments in, participate, make sure you've got your voice heard, because as I said, I don't think this train's moving and it's not going to stop.
Thank you. Okay, questions from the audience.
Mark,
Right here. Got one? Yep.
I was just going to ask, Mark, are traditional financial institutions ready to start investing or supporting the hemp industry?
Well, let's see what the FDIC says next week. They're going to issue their guidance, and look, there's money, and financial institutions are the backbone for every industry, right? Not just hemp. And so you can't really have a functioning industry if you can't have banking and lending and investment. And so the answer is that's got to get sorted out. And one of the first things I think that has to get sorted out. So I'm interested to really see, what the FDIC is going to do next week.
Hi, Anin Douglas Lee Indigenakaz Gawa Babiganikagin Dunjaba. I'm from White Earth, Minnesota. I'm a tribal member. I'm going to be a new grower this next year, and I'm a business owner, a small business owner. So I have a couple questions. I'll try to keep it short, though. As a small business owner, I think we're being kind of overlooked in the bigger project, the bigger side of it. You were mentioning, you're the first person I heard actually to mention like the smaller people. Everybody else is talking about capital and corporations, but small businesses, make up most of the jobs, right, in America. So I think we should really be focusing on economically on the small businesses in that aspect. Currently, if I want to buy some hemp legally, I can't get it locally in Minnesota. I have to have a certificate to buy it, just if I want to make something myself, or I want to cook with it. It's legal. But I can't get it local. I have to get it from out of state. I don't need a certificate if I want to buy it from Oregon and have it shipped here with the USPS. So I'm wondering if that's something that's going to be addressed, because that seems kind of crazy. I can't go to like my neighbor. I need to just go and get it with, even if he has the test results and everything's legit. I gotta have a certificate to get it from him, but I can get it through the mail with nothing like that.
Thank you. Anybody want to take that clarity on that question?
I might push that off to one of my staff people.
Okay.
They're going to be on the next panel, so could you ask the question to them? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. To Dr. Weiberg, just for clarity, you said the FDA does not allow it to be sold as a dietary supplement. Is that correct? That's what you're.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is their position that there's a provision in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that says that something that was previously subject to a new drug application cannot subsequently be put into a dietary supplement unless it had been marketed as a dietary supplement before then.
Right, and we've our intentions are to sell a CBD product. To my knowledge, and I've checked with a few, and I'm not looking for legal advice here today. I know I'm not going to get it, but to my knowledge, and I've been advised by other folks in the legal industry that CBD is not illegal. THC is, but CBD is not illegal. Now, again, I'm not trying to create
If I could maybe
Sure.
handle that question. We were talking about this a little bit. So in the last 14 or 15 months when I've been really looking at this, and I've actually gone and looked at the arguments that are being made by proponents of the industry and the sales of CBD, there are two legal issues involved here. And I think they're not always both being considered. So one is whether or not CBD is a controlled substance. The other is whether or not you can sell it as a drug or dietary supplement.
And correct me, and if I understand that, and that I was going to ask you for a little more discussion or description on the two qualifications you said there. It's adulterated and mislabeled products. So if you're not in either of those categories by default, then is it?
No.
Okay, here I see some. Okay,
So-
I'll
so the-
hang up and listen.
Yeah. So
Steve, get your microphone back.
So one of the two issues I mentioned has been resolved, and that is whether or not CBD by itself is a controlled substance. My reading of the Minnesota law is the Minnesota law actually, the legislature, by the way they defined hemp in 2015, excluded CBD that's derived from hemp as a controlled substance. In 2018, Congress first, and then 2019, the Minnesota legislature further changed the definition of hemp. So now, any product that has CBD, whether it's derived from hemp or marijuana, is not going to be a controlled substance as long as it has less than 0.3% THC. And so, but what the good news there is that means selling or possessing CBD is no longer potentially a felony. But the whole other set of law that people, I think, aren't looking at is the concept of misbranded and adulterated drugs. Yeah. Yep.
I'm sorry, just one more thing.
Yep.
Just trying to get a clarification, because obviously if we're going to have a product like this, we're going to have to sell it.
Well, you're
And
two questions away from being on a panel.
I know. So a friend of mine who's a retailer looked at me and goes, okay, what do I do when a cop show up and want to confiscate this? I said, I'm going to try to get a clarification here. And so I very much appreciate your distinctive definition. Thank you.
Thanks
I would
for your time
also-
today.
I would also just add that CBD is not an approved food ingredient by FDA either. So know that.
Well, and specifically in the Farm Bill, while it deregulated as a controlled substance, it left open this question of it was still subject to FDA regulation. And so FDA has been a bit on the hot seat to try to figure out, like what Ag did, Department of Ag, what they're going to do and how they're going to regulate it. We've obviously seen a number of warning letters from the FDA over the past number of months, and those warning letters really go to what kind of claims and what kind of statements you're making in regards to your product.
Steve, when we had our call, we said this is going to be a great panel because there's so many moving pieces yet, and I think we're starting. Anybody other than the front row that has a question now? We've got way there. You see him, Matt?
right field, as you say.
Thanks.
There you go.
Right field, deep right field. I too get calls from clients
And
asking.
who are you? Just in
Hi, I'm Tom Norby. I'm a lawyer that works here in the Twin Cities in some of this area. And like was mentioned, you get calls, is this legal? What can I do? Just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And I appreciate the regulators working to try to get some clarity. My question is this: if CBD is not a food or not an approved food, it's not a dietary supplement, it's not a drug, and it's not marijuana, then what is it as a regulatory being? How does it exist and where does it fit?
Well, I can take that on.
Cody?
So first of all, the assumption of your question from the drug perspective is incorrect. CBD is a drug in two different ways. So the pharmacy training in me, when I looked into this, CBD is a pharmacologically active substance. It doesn't just affect the endocannabinoid system, it affects other receptors in the body, such as serotonin, which means it can interact with certain drugs, also metabolized by the liver, by a group of enzymes that metabolizes about 50% of the drugs we have, right? So it's a drug that way, but it is legally a drug. If the intended use is to treat, prevent, cure diseases, or to alter the structure or function of human bodies, it falls under the legal definition of drug, both at the federal and state level. That's what makes it a drug.
Let me just add one comment to that. I think you're absolutely right in terms of ticking down all those categories. But more to the point, though, is what are you going to say about the product you want to sell? What are you going to claim on your label? And to the extent it deals with structure or form or function, or to the extent you want to make statements regarding diagnosis, curing, preventing disease, then I agree with the comment here about it's a drug. To the extent that we all know you can buy products out that says calcium builds strong bones, right? It's a dietary supplement. It's not approved. That statement's not approved by the FDA, but you see it all the time. And I think we're seeing CBD move in that direction, right? Where we're not making drug claims or health claims, but we're making claims that fall more in the dietary supplement category. And the question then is, does FDA intend to regulate that?
Steve, we're going to take one more question to your right.
I'm gathering that the conclusion is that governmental agencies don't have the resources or the will to prosecute to the nth degree. Is there some other area, private citizens, who knows what, that could bring suit?
Oh, I think there's lots of potential for litigation surrounding the products that come out of hemp. Sure, just like any other industry or product. I don't think it's fair to say that the government or the regulators aren't, moving on this. They are. And I think we're seeing that. There's you probably know better than I, Whitney. There's 40 states now that have some form of regulatory programs either in place or coming online. So again, I think the comment earlier about the trains left the station, we're going to see more and more certainty. It's just going to take some period of time for it to happen. That's not going to stop, though. Even with regulatory regime, even with somebody saying it's fine, that's not going to stop litigation. It's not going to stop the very same kinds of legal issues that any other company would have. You're still going to have those same issues. So I guess I don't necessarily see a big difference there because it's hemp-based versus, some other type of product.
And maybe I could tell you what I tell pharmacists that want to sell this. I've told them right now we don't want to see it in the pharmacy itself because that's a licensed space. We've told them we're no more likely to take action if they have it up in the front end that's unlicensed than we are against anyone else. But I also tell pharmacists, if you're going to go out and recommend this product, you should check with your own attorney and your malpractice insurer. Because if you recommend a product and it harms somebody, we may be the least of your worries. It may be that you're going to have a malpractice suit filed against you.
And just to add on the food side, we assess kind of our food safety programs based on risk. And so, I don't know how many food inspectors we have, but there's no way we could possibly regulate CBD products. But if you are a CBD company who doesn't have a food safety license, you have to make sure you still have all of those other requirements in place. But, the potential is there. If the risk is high, we might go after you. And the FDA has done the same thing.
Well, good. Well, I think we've run out of time. I just want to say, this just screams collaboration. I'm proud to be a Minnesotan. We seem to be getting together, departments leading these listing sessions is both helping and regulating, as Commissioner Peterson talked about when those are. So let's try to keep together on this to birth a new crop, a new industry, and to do it with it. We're better together than separate. So I'd like to end on that note. Give a round of applause to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, panel.